Good evening and welcome. Tonight we track a sharper, more structured phase in the US-China competition where pressure is no longer improvised. It is being formalized. Beijing has sanctioned 20 US defense-related companies and 10 executives over a major Taiwan arms package, signaling that it will raise the cost of moves it sees as crossing red lines. And in parallel, China has revised its foreign trade law, expanding its legal toolkit for countermeasures while reshaping the rules for market access, with the changing takes effect in March 2026. Taken together, these two steps show how China is combining targeted punishment with long-term rule-making to prepare for a more contested economic and security environment. I'm Rehan Morsi, and this is In Focus, where we cut through the noise and stay with what really shifts the story. China has imposed sanctions on 20 U.S. defense-related companies and 10 executives a week after Washington announced a major arms package for Taiwan. Beijing says the Taiwan issue is a core red line, while the U.S. says it is obligated to help Taiwan defend itself. China's foreign ministry said the measure includes freezing the company's assets in China and banning individuals and organizations from doing business with them. It said sanctioned executives would be barred from entering China and have their Chinese-based assets frozen. The move follows a proposed U.S. arms package worth more than $10 billion, which would be the largest ever for Taiwan if approved by Congress. Beijing says arms sales violate understandings with Washington and warned those involved will pay a price. The sanctions land as China's military activity around Taiwan remains high, and as the broader U.S.-China relationship stays strained over trade, technology, and human rights. To unpack this with us, we're joined from Beirut by a researcher in Asian Studies and Affairs, Ms. Tamara Biro. Welcome to Qnews and thank you for joining us. Let's start off here by asking about China sanctioning 20 U.S. defense companies as well as 10 executives. Is this mainly symbolic messaging or an actual move designed to create some sort of real cost as well as long-term deterrence to any further moves towards China?
Good afternoon to you and to your viewers, and thank you for hosting me. Generally, when the U.S. had an arms agreement with Taiwan, China imposes sanctions on the U.S. individuals and companies related to these arms and or having military maritime maneuvers around Taiwan. This is what China has done recently as a response reaction to the arms agreement with the biggest arms agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan. So China rejects military or arms agreement or visiting the U.S. Visits officials to the U.S. or to Taiwan or vice versa, because China considers Taiwan is one of its lands, and it considers that the military assistance or arms agreements between the U.S. and Taiwan is an intervention inside the internal affairs of China, which it rejects completely. To China, Taiwan is a red line. Therefore, the president always says that Taiwan is out of negotiations and cannot be touched, and it's not only it's the cause of the Chinese people. but Taiwan will be annexed again to China, but the time is not determined yet. In regards to the Chinese sanctions, it's measures that has always been taken from by China as a reaction for the arms agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan, but this time there is some points can't be delivered in regards to Chinese sanctions on Taiwan. This is $11 billion agreement, which is a very big agreement comparing to the previous ones. China, including one of the sanctions is prevention the rare minerals to Taiwan, which will to the U.S. Which will impact the industry in regards to because of the limitation or restriction of importing such or exporting such rare minerals. These measures increase the restrictions. I think China will also intensify maritime and air maneuvers around Taiwan, and if the tension goes on between the U.S. and China around Taiwan and increase the cooperation or the exchange between the U.S. and Taiwan, China may hold the trade and
Yes.
other
Well,
agreements.
you're saying there that these measures are not symbolic; it's just the first set of what could possibly happen in the future. Now, with these measures included, they include asset freezes as well as business bans and entry bans. In practice, which parts of the U.S. defense ecosystem are most exposed, like prime contractors, suppliers, dual-use tech firms, or executives with business ties, or is this just going to be a soft landing of what could be in the future?
We can say that all of those people, all of those you mentioned, will be impacted as a result of the Chinese restrictions on the U.S. defense companies and the executors of these companies, or restricting the rare minerals. But restricting rare minerals may impact or make a deficiency in the U.S. defense system, because they depend mainly on making plans. And when China imposed restrictions or made restrictions previously on rare minerals, that enraged the U.S. and Trump's reaction that accelerated to make phone calls with China in order to continue the flow of rare minerals in return of the U.S. Importing SIM cards to China. The technology that China wants in return of the rare minerals export.
But couldn't the Americans also somehow circumvent this? They're already working on their own set of deals when it comes to rare mineral earths, like in Ukraine. Is this going to actually affect the Americans if the Chinese withhold their rare minerals?
It may impact Ukraine because the U.S. exports weapons and arms to Ukraine and to the European Union. So if China imposed restrictions on rare minerals to the U.S., the companies that will imposed on will be impacted even to Ukraine and to Israel, because the U.S. is the biggest supplier of arms to Israel. Therefore, the U.S. arms industry will be impacted. But I think the negotiations can be held between the U.S. and China in regards to this matter. And one of the companies that was restricted is an American country in one of the U.S. states. So Boeing planes industry will be impacted if China restricted the export of rare minerals to this company as well.
Okay, well, Washington's response here is that the arms sales are consistent with its legal obligations to help Taiwan defend itself. But Beijing calls this, as you've clearly said, a red line. Taiwan is a red line. Given these circumstances, how close are we to actually reaching a point where with each arms package that Washington sends, it will trigger some sort of escalation from the Chinese side?
I think this what happened is an escalation and messages that every party wants to relate to the other. I don't think China or even the US want to make both areas turn to a war. Even if the US provided assistance to Taiwan, China didn't attack Taiwan. The condition that China puts in order to reunify with Taiwan militarily is that the separatists in Taiwan announce the independence of Taiwan with the support of the U.S. But they want to integrate Taiwan peacefully by the recognition of countries, or the most countries may cut their ties with Taiwan. But everyone considered most analysis considered the U.S. Through Trump's announcements on Taiwan that they want Taiwan to increase its defense agreements. Even in the announcement, they didn't mention Taiwan in details or give it importance. Most analysts suspected that Trump may defend Taiwan or continuing the agreement with Taiwan to have negotiations or agreements with China. But there is members in the U.S. Congress from Democratic and Republic. They prevent abandoning Taiwan because as a pressure card the U.S. always uses every time they want to provoke Beijing in it, as well as Taiwan's important strategic importance on Taiwan Norway, which is a very important maritime narrowing, as well as the DHMC company pioneering in SIM cards in Taiwan. So therefore, the U.S. will not allow China to overtake Taiwan and overtake the company, which is very important to the U.S. because who owns the SIM card owns the whole world.
Okay, if Taiwan's package is approved and becomes the largest ever, what does this tell us about the U.S. strategy? Is this still considered deterrence for the Chinese, or is it signaling something deeper, something worse? For instance, when it comes to Washington, how they're dealing with the Chinese, they seem to be trying to pick a fight with them at every turn, including the tariff wars that we saw in the last year.
We can say that all the possibilities you mentioned is a message that the U.S. will not abandon their coalition, will always stand by them against China. Also, from another side, it's a pressure card, using it to make Beijing follow their orders in regards to the sensitivity of Taiwan. For China is always a red line, especially in the reign of Asian Being. They think that Taiwan will go back to China before 2049, which is the anniversary of establishing the Republic Chinese, the Republic of China. Therefore, they will have annexed Taiwan either by peaceful ways or political or military ones. But anyways, I do not think that the U.S., if China attacked Taiwan, which is highly unlikely currently, unless if separatists announced the individual independence of Taiwan. There is U.S. American reports indicating that China will attack Taiwan in 2027, knowing that the Chinese president, according to Trump's announcement, that the Chinese president said that he will not attack Taiwan during their term. So they gave safeguards that they will not attack Taiwan unless the separatists announce their individual independence, which is highly unlikely because Trump doesn't want to have a war in this area. They only want to provoke China. We know that in case a war erupts in both oceans, or if China attacks Taiwan, we know the harms, the economic harms will impact the whole world, because China is the second, the world's second economy in the so therefore the world economy will be impacted. Taiwan narrowing will be closed. So therefore there will be destabilization. Also, SIM cards will be are from Taiwan, so there is not in the best of interest to anyone to have an attack in this area. Neither China nor the U.S. nor the neighborhood countries, especially Japan or Philippines, helped Taiwan in case of an attack. China has, and we refer to the announcement of Prime Minister of Taiwan, Kayachi, that announced that in case a Chinese attack on Taiwan, Japan considered as a national security threat, which will result in its interference. Also, in a case of a Chinese attack on Taiwan, the U.S. may interfere and there may be a war, but I still find it unlikely to have a Chinese military attack on Taiwan currently.
Okay, well, you're saying the likelihood of China taking some sort of military action is quite low. But in the recent years, we've seen an increase of military activity around Taiwan from China. How do you see this? And do sanctions work with the Chinese, or military pressure work with the Chinese? Is this something that is likely to make next steps a little more complicated?
The military movements in regard of China around Taiwan increased since 2022 when the Parliament President Nancy Lucy visited Taiwan, which provoked China, that started to have military air maritime maneuvers. Since then till now, there is it intensified maneuvers that may benefited China in having military trainings around Taiwan in case of a military attack. So they are trained to attack attacking Taiwan with different sophisticated, advanced, whether maritime besiege or air dropping or air maneuvers. I think in case the U.S. provoking China later on or in the future in regards to China, whether increasing arms or U.S. official visits to Taiwan, or allowing the Taiwanese Prime Minister to visit the U.S. as a crossing point. There is a lot of measures taken by China, whether by rejecting or intensifying military maneuvers, or even as happened by imposing sanctions on American companies, restricting rare minerals exports, as well as pending agreements, cultural, military, economic, between China and the U.S. Or maybe China may impose restrictions or sanctions on Taiwan as well.
Well, your point there is clear, but we're out of time for this segment. But thank you so much for joining us from Beirut. That was Ms. Tamara Biro, a researcher in Asian Studies and Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your insights and joining us here tonight. China has passed, still with Asia's powerhouse, China has passed a revision to its foreign trade law, expanding Beijing's legal toolkit to respond to external economic pressure while also signaling further market opening. The changes are set to take effect on March 1st, 2026. China's top legislator approved the updated law on Saturday, with state media saying it strengthens mechanisms to counter external challenges and ties foreign trade more directly to national development goals. The revision keeps tools that allow Beijing to respond to partners with restrict Chinese exports, and further develops systems such as negative lists to open selected sectors to foreign firms. It also put greater emphasis on digital and green trade alongside intellectual property provisions, a shift that aligns with standards needed for Beijing's bid to join major trans-Pacific trade frameworks. The broader message is that China is formalizing economic statecraft, writing clearer rules for both opening and retaliation as it prepares for a more contested global trade environment. To talk to us more about this current situation, we're joined from Hong Kong by Dr. Marvin Lee, a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester. Thank you for joining us here on Qnews, sir. Let's start off by asking you now, is this revision described as a strengthening of Beijing's ability to wage a trade war while also opening the economy? In terms of practical terms, is this about liberalization or about building more controlled openness when it comes to withholding or retaliating towards these external pressures?
Assalamu alaikum. Suklani istidafati barakallahu fikum. From the Beijing's perspective, there are two sides of the same coin. This is defensive liberalization from the Chinese perspective. The liberalization, like the law, codifies the negative list system for servers, according to Article 33, and moving China towards a permit unless prohibit international standard. This is designed to attract high-quality foreign investment in non-sensitive sectors. And how about control? Like simultaneously, it sharpens the sword by centralizing retaliation tools according to Article 7. It is about building a regulated gateway. China is signaling that while the door is open, the state now has highly precise legalized mechanism to strike back if that openness is met with unnatural sanctions or de-risking measures from the Western world, especially from the USA.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they chose the law to take effect on March 1st, 2026. Why is this? Why did they select that time? And what does it suggest about Beijing's preparedness, I suppose, for higher trade friction in the next year? Are they expecting the Americans to, create a bigger tariff war?
Yes, definitely. From the Chinese perspective, we like playing the idea or the concept of timing or diplomatic leverage or timing leverage. The timing is a strategic marker stroke of legalist readiness. Like the buffer zone, 2025 is expected to be a volatile year of testing the waters with the US administration. By settling the date of the 1st of March 2025, Beijing allows itself 40 months to observe how trade frictions manifest before achieving the new legal powers. And the April 2026 flashpoint is really important for the Chinese because the 1st of March is exactly 1 month before the anticipated expiration of the truce or the escalation of Phase 2 tariff in April 2026. This ensures that before the next major wave of the trade war hits, China's legal war chest is fully operational and lawsuit-proof to protect the national interest for the Chinese government and the Chinese people.
Well, if we could talk about the controlled openness that you just discussed there, do you think that this is also possibly a way to make way for the Europeans to be more involved with China as, they're sort of freezing themselves out, I suppose, from the Americans because Trump again, is picking a fight with the Europeans as well.
Yes, this is a very good point here as well. The Chinese government is fond of playing a diplomatic leverage called encircle the enemy by befriending with the opponent of the USA. And clearly, in this context, China would like to build a build a stronger relationship with the EU, not just with the EU, with the rest of the world, especially with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, Central Asia, in order to sell all the Chinese-made product to the rest of the world, in order to de-escalate or eliminate the negative impact posed by the US.
Well, the revision expands countermeasure tools and emphasizes the trade serving national development goals. Does that somehow lower the threshold for using export controls and restrictions, especially on the strategic minerals and dual-use goods, now that there's sort of a trade war, as well as, Taiwan being a factor when it comes to US-Chinese relations, or not, or lack thereof, actually?
I really like your question because actually the so-called this China new foreign trade law or the rare earth export control and all these like measures posed by the Chinese government is actually an extended topic between the diplomacy between US and China. And the USA has just announced arms sales to Taiwan, and China needs to do the same to protect the national interest. Because China right now in 2025 is really totally different from China in 2016. And let me give you an example here. Huawei and Xiaomi used to be a phone manufacturer 9 years ago, but right now they have been building, selling, and manufacturing EV cars, and the entire ecosystem, home furniture, AI, everything to the rest of the world. So that's why China right now is much stronger and they have more resilience than before.
Well, since you brought up EVs and a resilience of the economy, how significant is the push towards digital trade, green trade, intellectual property? Is this mainly to meet the CPTPP style standards, or to project that China, as you said, in 2025 is a very different China with different sets of rules and is willing to defend its supply chain?
Before answering your question, let me mention there is a Chinese-made policy here, Made in China 2025. And this was launched exactly 10 years ago, around this time. And I believe that 80% of the goal have already been achieved, especially the Chinese-made AI like DeepSeek, EV cars, shipbuildings, aircraft carriers, etc. And this also create another wave of diplomatic leverage, which also relates to the economic leverage, like what you have mentioned, CPTPP style, in order to strengthen Chinese economy and the bargaining power to deal with other countries like Southeast Asia, the Pacific Ocean, and the Middle East, especially the Middle East nowadays.
Okay, well, the mention of negative lists suggests a more formal mechanism for opening restricted sectors. In your experience, does that increasingly, or rather increase the predictability for foreign firms, or does it simply codify discretion under this new framework?
Actually, it provides political predictability, but retains policy sovereignty here. And China in 2025 is quite different from China in 2000. Back then, China used to rely on the foreign power, like the technological power, economic power. But nowadays, China is much stronger than before. So that's why the Chinese government has just set a law. Okay, if you want to do business with the Chinese people and even enter the Chinese market, you have to follow the rules. So there is an advantage here for a foreign bank or consultancy. A foreign negative list is a major win here. It removes the black box or of administrative approval for non-list sectors. And there is a disadvantage here as well. The law maintains broad security renewal clause, while the process is now more transparent and more like a Western style. The discretion to intervene for national interest remain absolute. It's an upgrade from used to be a reliance to a defined power for 2026 and for the national goal of 2035.
Okay, from Hong Kong, that was Dr. Marvin Lee, a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your insights. Tonight, China signaled two things at once. It is willing to impose costs over Taiwan, and it is preparing the legal ground for tougher economic competition in 2026. Sanctions may be the headline, but the deeper shift is institutional. Pressure is being built into policy and law. The question now is whether Washington and Beijing can contain this rivalry, or whether it will keep widening into a sustained cycle of retaliation and risk. I'm Anne Morsi. Thank you for watching tonight's episode of In Focus, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.